What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching. Just wanted to let you know before the start of this video that my throat is kind of messed up a little bit for now, so we will be having a best of compilation tonight. Hopefully tomorrow it will be a little bit better and we will get right back into all the new story compilations. So without further ado, thank you guys so much for listening and I hope you enjoy these stories. I grew up out in the country, and I've lived my whole life out there as well. I'm a country boy born and bred. When I get drunk on old Milwaukee, I listen to bluegrass music on the radio. Also when I smoke weed. I've always liked living in that way, and I even have someone else writing this story for me to share it with you, because I can't really write that well myself. I've always wanted to share the scariest thing that ever happened to me on Christmas, though. I could have stayed living with my parents for as long as I wanted to, really. Hell, my mom loved me, and she would have had me kept there forever, but you know how it is. I wanted to get out and get on my own. Start forming my own life. So I took a job working on a farm. The guy who owned the farm had an old building in the back that he left me to live in. It was set pretty far away from his home. It didn't have heating, but it did have water, electricity, and a stove, so I was able to have food. I had to use the stove to keep warm sometimes during the winter, but that didn't really bother me at all. Of course, in the winter times, there wasn't nearly as much work to do as there was during the summer. There were some things to do, but they were things that were done pretty quickly and done pretty easily. I ended up spending a lot of free time alone in that small building. The boys would come over and hang out and smoke some weed with me in the summertime, but they would rarely come over to hang out in the dead cold of winter. I lived a pretty simple life, but I was in love with it. I would have loved to go over to my mom's house for the holidays, but I really wasn't able to. There was some work on the farm every day, even if it was only a little bit. I had to be home during that time. I was a little bit sad about that, and I'm sure my mom was too, but there wasn't really anything to be done. On Christmas Eve, I decided to make myself a bit of Christmas dinner. The family that owned the farm had gone off to spend time with other relatives for the holidays. I think one of the other children had stayed home to do a bit of something as well. I noticed him outside while I was finishing up my chores. We didn't really talk though, since the two of us never really talked anyways. I never thought that he liked me very much actually, so I was a bit uncomfortable being alone with him on the farm. I remember it being so damn cold that night. There was a little bit of snow on the ground, but it wasn't that much. The sky was very overcast before I'd even gone in for the night. It seemed it might start snowing again at any time, and I was right. It soon did. I was beginning to think this was the perfect Christmas Eve I could spend by myself. By that time, I was ready to eat. The snow was falling pretty heavily, and the wind was blowing strongly, making really loud wailing sounds as the night went on. As I was eating, I suddenly heard a gunshot ring out. Now, some people hearing this might react differently than me when they hear a gunshot. They might be scared and get up and try to find where the noise came from. I didn't do anything like that, though. Gunshots were pretty normal in the area I lived in. Then I heard another one, though, which I paid much more attention to than the first one. I noticed where the second shot seemed to have come from, the direction of the farmhouse. That was really weird to me. I never thought the guy, whose name was Josh, would ever have anything to do with guns. Didn't seem like the type. I tried to put it out of my head, though. Again, gunshots in that area were not really an uncommon sound. I just ate my meal and went about my own business. The wind was still blowing really hard, so I didn't hear anything else after the second gunshot. While I was eating, a little while after all the sounds had stopped, I heard something just outside my own little building. It sounded like some loud grunts or something like that. A few moments later, there was a loud thud right up against the door. It was extremely noisy, and I could see the door shake as it happened. I was startled. I heard some more movement outside my door, and then a more minor thud right after. After that, there weren't any more noises. I had no idea what was going on, of course, but I was scared. It wasn't like someone was knocking on the door. It was like something had been thrown against it, or something had fallen onto it. That's why I was so confused. I got up and walked over to the door. I was scared to open it, but I decided I had to. I took a moment of breath before I did. When I opened it, a body that was leaning against the door literally fell onto me. It took me a moment to realize that the person was Josh. He was in bad shape too, bleeding in several places. He'd obviously been shot. I had never seen something like this before, and I didn't know what to do. I pulled Josh inside the building and tried to ask him what happened. He was in shock though, and wasn't able to tell me much of anything, so that didn't really help. I decided I had to go to the main house and call an ambulance. Stupidly, I told Josh to wait there and ran out of the building. I was hustling and trying to make it to the house. As I did, I rounded around the house to the front and saw there was a truck parked there that I didn't recognize. I also saw the front door was wide open. I stopped for a moment, trying to figure out what was going on. The man in the car picked his gun up, although he didn't seem to be looking in my direction. Before he noticed me, I snuck around to the back of the home. Luckily, the back door was unlocked. The 911 dispatcher was going to send the police, so I had to tell them about the guy. Thankfully, I don't think he ever saw me. I don't know if he intended to hunt Josh down or what, but as soon as I got back inside, I locked things up until the police arrived. Fortunately, Josh survived and recovered, but it took a long while. The man was found and arrested, but I don't really know what happened to him after that. This is one of those experiences that really sticks with you, regardless of how much time passes. The kind that you make sure to tell your friends and family when reminiscing about scary experiences. This took place during my high school days, back in 2008. Starting high school wasn't exactly the best time in my life. I despised the politics of the high school microcosm and didn't get along with most of the students or teachers. Yeah, I was kind of an outcast. I decided that I was through with school because I saw it as nothing but a toxic environment, a waste of my time. Naturally, this didn't quite go over well with my parents. My mother is a school teacher, so I would have to hear those lectures about how education is the foundation for the rest of your life. Blah, blah, blah. Looking back from where I am now, I can certainly agree with that. But I was an impulsive teenager with a severe lack of common sense. After about a year, I enrolled in a sort of alternate school, which was a place of sanctuary for pregnant teenagers and dropout rejects like myself. They offered me the opportunity to earn a high school diploma in a special program. It would allow me to graduate a year earlier than when I was supposed to originally, class of 2011. With this program, I was now officially class of 2010. Shit, a year off my sentence? Sign me up. I went through the process of being enrolled, and before I knew it, I was hopping on the bus for my very first day of my sophomore-junior year. I couldn't help but bask in the feeling of flunking my freshman year yet still being one step ahead of my former classmates. When I arrived, it was basically back to square one for me. I was surrounded by young women in various stages of pregnancy and young men with time in juvenile hall under their belts. Needless to say, I didn't really fit in with the crowd. I sat alone in the cafeteria during breakfast and stared off into space, speaking to no one at all. That was until this dude I recognized walked through the lunchroom doors. His name was George, and he was one of the very few people I actually talked to at my previous high school. We weren't exactly the best of friends or anything, but he was the only person I really knew. Turns out we were pretty much in the same boat as well. I waved him over and we made some small talk and reconnected. Later that day, my sister offered to pick me up from school, so after classes were over, I went outside to the parking lot to wait for her. George had someone picking him up as well, so we got to talking again while waiting. "How was your day, man?" "It sucked." "I hear you, man. People are so stupid." "I know what you mean. I wish I could just kill them all." Yeah, sure, dude." "No, I'm serious. I want to bring a gun and mow them all down. I fucking hate these people." "Yeah, sure. Hey, there's my sister, so I'll catch you later, George." He went silent and gave me a blank stare as I quickly ran my way over to the car. Now, you're probably wondering why that conversation didn't raise any red flags, but I had about 1,000,000 things on my mind. I brushed off the morbid conversation as just some bitter adolescent talk. The next day, the class schedule alternated, and George and I ended up having the same art class. On a side note, the art teacher and I were cool, because she would let me draw pictures of skulls and zombies and stuff, instead of doing the lame-ass work she assigned. Anyway, I was sitting at the table with George and 2 other guys. The 2 guys were talking to each other, and I was drawing the sweet picture of Iron Maidens. George suddenly got up and walked over to the classroom door and ripped down a map of the school that was taped to the wall next to the door. He brought it back to the table and proceeded to mark on it with a red pen. One of the other guys asked him what he was doing. "You'll see. Everyone will see." Even then, I didn't really think too much of it, even though I did remember the conversation we'd had in the parking lot. You have to understand, George was the kind of person that got off on the uncomfortable attention he got from being vague and creepy. This school was meant to be a place for outcasts anyway. I figured he was just trying to grab attention, imagining some fucked up fantasy or something. A couple of days after that, I was walking to art class again. Just before I entered, the door opened, and a police officer left the room, escorting George away, followed closely by the principal. I froze in genuine shock and dread. All I could think was, oh shit. George was staring right at me, with cold eyes as he passed by. I couldn't even meet them. I turned to look away. Turns out I wasn't the only person he'd hinted to about his twisted aspirations. The school was full of young coming parents after all, and apparently they took his behavior as much more of a threat than I did. Can't really say I blame them though. They found some stuff on his MySpace page about his planned massacre at the school. Here in Florida, threats like that are taken very seriously, even if it's just some dumb teenager shouting some nonsense. Turns out the police found more than 28 firearms at his home, though to be fair, they were all registered to George's grandfather. Thankfully, George was taken away and the guns were confiscated from him. Nothing ever came of his sickening plans. Sadly though, the school was shut down a few years ago. Aside from that incident, I ended up having some pretty good times there. It helped me get my act together, and I ended up graduating in the class of 2010 as planned. I can't exactly say for sure if George would have fully gone through with it, but I'll never forget the cold certainty behind what he said that day in art class. You'll see. Everyone will. This happened around 3 years ago, and I still get goosebumps whenever I even think about it. It was about 9 o'clock or so, I believe. I had just gotten home from a hard day of work and was settling in when my doorbell rang. I sighed and went to look through the peephole of the door, only to see a random woman I'd never met before, in her late 30s. She was just standing there. I thought, oh great, this must be some religious solicitation door-to-door salesman thing like that. I was not in the mood for sure. "Yes?" I said as I opened the door a tiny crack. "Excuse me, but is this Mr. Kamura's house?" she asked very politely. "Yeah, that's my name. It says so on the post box, so anyone could have read it in the lobby." I was still a bit surprised, though, to find someone looking for me. I was tired and couldn't really be bothered to deal with her, so I replied, "No, sorry. No Mr. Kamura's here, I'm afraid. You have the wrong place." I began to close the door, but before I could shut it all the way, she looked me dead in the eyes. "It's you, isn't it? Don't try to hide from me, Mr. Kamura." She screeched out the last part as she pushed against the door as hard as she could. I was in shock as she forced the door open and now stepped inside my apartment. I was in total panic mode. I remember I just kept saying no over and over again. I began to regain some composure, and I attempted to push her back towards the door. "Get off me! I know it's you, Mr. Kamura. I found you," she called out. It was getting more and more escalated. I didn't know exactly what the hell was going on here. I had no idea what to do. I shouted that if she didn't get out right now, I was going to call the police. The woman went silent and glared at me with a puzzled look on her face. Just as suddenly as she'd forced her way in, she simply turned and left my apartment without any further drama. I double-checked to make sure the door was locked and the chain was on after. After much stressing out and worrying, I eventually went to bed. As you might have guessed, I couldn't sleep much that night. The next day, on my way home, I saw a younger woman waiting in an alley in a kind of blind spot. She looked to be a high school student. In fact, she looked a bit like the woman from last night. I guessed it might have been her daughter. I thought for a second, surely not. I must be getting paranoid. That was until she noticed me and started running right towards me. She began shouting. She had something in her hand as well. As I looked closer, I noticed it was a small knife. She was shouting and running at me with a knife in her hand. It was horrifying. Thankfully, I was not too far away from my apartment. I managed to run in and lock the door behind me. The girl began to sing through the door. "Mr. Kamura, come outside. Come outside, Mr. Kamura. If you don't come out, I'll kill you." I frantically dialed the police on my phone. As it was ringing, I dashed around my apartment, checking to make sure my windows were locked and the curtains were closed. I flipped the lights off as well. The police answered, and I explained the situation in a panicked voice. They tried their best to calm me down and said they were sending someone immediately. They would be there in less than 2 minutes. They told me to make sure the doors were locked. I went to the window to peek outside. I could see the daughter trying to climb the wall to get to my window. I also noticed the mother standing outside smiling and staring in at me. She started looking around the garden for something. That's the last thing I saw before I closed the curtains. My guess is she was looking for something to smash in my window, because suddenly something started banging against it. There was a banging from upstairs as well. I guess the girl had managed to reach the window up there. She was screeching, "I just want to meet you." I was cowering in my bathroom, frantically searching for anything to defend myself. All that was available was my toilet brush. I gripped the handle tightly, with my back against the wall, shivering in fear. After about 5 minutes, I heard a new voice. "What are you doing?" It was a male voice. Could it be the police officer? It certainly sounded like a police officer. I heard my doorbell ringing. "Mr. Kamura, this is the police. Are you okay?" I felt an awesome sense of relief wash over me. I went with the cop to the police station. I wanted to find out why these people were doing this to me. I wanted an explanation. The police confirmed that the women were under arrest. It transpired that she had committed the exact same crimes against another Mr. Kamura. I was informed her daughter was going to be placed in the care of another family member. I don't know exactly which Mr. Kamura they were looking for, or what exactly he did to them to make them act like this. I had never seen either of the women before. It worries me to think that one day they might try to come back. I've considered even changing my name, and of course, after all this happened, I moved house pretty much immediately. This experience happened to me in Fort Worth, Texas, in the year 2003, when I was still a sophomore in high school. Me, my brother Chris, and a friend of ours, who for the sake of this story I'll call Robert, were all really bored one day in the fall. We decided to go explore this tunnel that led into the sewers. We'd found it under a bridge. It was just because we had nothing better to do that day that we did this. It was sort of a last-minute kind of thing. Not very much planning or thought was put into it. Anyway, this is how I remember things happening all these years later. My brother Chris had invited our friend Robert over after school. We wanted to do something different this time, aside from just sitting around and playing video games. We all suggested we go outside and go walking in the field behind our house. As we did that, we descended across the street beyond the field, where there was a pretty busy street with traffic throughout the day. After jaywalking across, we walked towards the bridge underpass. We carefully walked down to the swamp under the bridge, trying not to slip and slide into the filthy-looking water below. We saw tons of graffiti down there, and then we discovered a tunnel opening. It led to the sewers. We thought to ourselves, why not go exploring? We thought it would be safe as a trio. My brother Chris entered first, me being in the middle, and Robert bringing up the rear of the tunnel. It wasn't wide enough for us to walk side by side. It was so narrow we had to walk in a single-file straight line. We used the lights on our cell phones to light the way. Now, let me clarify, this was before smartphones and iPhones and things like that. So the lights from our cell phone screens were all we had to navigate this area. We did have some light peeking through from outside the sewer grates above us, but it really wasn't enough to make much a difference. We traveled at a reasonable pace, seeing a lot of graffiti on both sides of us. As we walked in further, though, nothing out of the ordinary occurred. As we made our way down, we could hear cars passing by on the street above us. Everything sounded and looked okay for the most part. Then we got to the end of the tunnel. It led into a room with a sewer manhole with the lid closed, and two more tunnel openings, one on the left and the other on the right. Now, you would expect this room to be covered in graffiti too, but strangely enough, only 3 words were spray-painted in white, "Wrong way." It was at this point we all started to feel a bit on edge, as if someone was concealed by the surrounding darkness and was watching us. We immediately started hearing sounds from the other tunnels. There came what sounded like a torrent of voices crying out in agony, along with loud stomping footsteps, as if someone in boots was making their way towards us. The horrific sounds emanating from the tunnels were distorted and bounced off the walls around us. It kind of reminded me of the scene in Haunting of Hell House, where the 2 leads of the movie started hearing footsteps of a ghost before it started pounding on their bedroom door. We all immediately turned around and ran back the way we came from. As before, Chris was in front, I was in the middle, and Robert was at the rear. We were all terrified that someone was right behind us. The relentless footsteps picked up their pace. I remember Robert was kind of pushing and shoving me. He was probably the most terrified, seeing as he was at the very back. As we ran, the hellish torrent of echoing voices seemed to intensify. Then, whoever was behind us stopped screaming all at once. We shot out of the opening of the tunnel and immediately made our way back to the top of the bridge, never looking back. As soon as we felt we were safe, we finally stopped to catch our breath. Then we talked about what happened for hours. I came to the conclusion that it was probably some homeless people living down there. They probably thought they were going to be discovered and set off to scare us. The only way they really could. The ominous graffiti sign of "Wrong Way" was probably put up as a warning to stay away. Regardless of what happened though, we never did anything like that again. I've not been to that sewer tunnel since, nor do I ever plan to. I've never told this story to anyone at all. You young kids out there who are bored and want to find something to do for yourself, do yourself a favor and stay away from the sewers. You never know what you're going to find or hear down there. This happened back when I was a college student. During that time, I shared a house with a roommate named Stephanie, and we each had our own bedroom. When I was in college, I used the Snapchat app on a daily basis. Quite a few of my friends are on Snapchat, not just from college, but from high school and other places as well. I snap with quite a few of them regularly. One night, though, I got added by someone new on Snapchat. When I looked at the username, I didn't know who it was. I could see it was a guy, and I thought possibly it might have been someone I went to school with or something. Maybe I had met him at some point in time or something like that. I had been in college for a couple of years, and I had met loads of people in my time there. I added the user back, seeing that his Bitmoji was a pretty typical looking guy. Not long after this, I received a snap from him. I opened it, curious as to who this guy was and what he was sending me. It was just a blank picture of nothing really. It seemed to be all black. I wondered why he had sent me this. I opened it and didn't respond at all. A couple of hours went by. Now it was a little bit later at night. My roommate Stephanie was gone, and I was at home all by myself. I was in my bedroom doing some homework, planning on going to bed soon, when I received another message from the same guy. Just like before, it was another picture. This time when I opened it up though, the picture looked like it was of my house. The picture was taken from my street. When I saw this, I wondered how this person could be there. How could they know this was my house? I sent a chat to this guy and asked him what he was doing. He opened it but didn't immediately reply. I went over to my bedroom window, which was covered, and lifted the blinds slightly to look outside. When I did, I didn't see anything out there. Now, I couldn't see the whole street from my window, of course, but I could see a good chunk of it. I was hoping that maybe this person was just walking by. Maybe this was one of my friends who actually knew me and was playing a joke on me. It seemed pretty unlikely for that to be the case, though. Hopefully the guy was gone by now. About 5 minutes or so had gone by, and I had gone back to my homework. I was just about finishing when I got another message from the same guy. This time, though, it was not a picture at all. It was an actual chat. "Open your front door." I got up and left my bedroom. I carefully walked over to the living room and looked out the window that had a view of the front step. I saw a man standing there, right outside the front door. From where I was, I couldn't see the guy's face. I could only see up to his shoulders, so I really didn't know who he was. This clearly didn't appear to be anybody I recognized, though, so I had no plans to open the door for him. I responded by asking who he was. He didn't reply. I threatened to call the police. I told him if he didn't leave or tell me who he was, I would call them right now. He opened that message but didn't respond to it either. I watched him continue to stand at the front step. Then, after about a minute, I saw him leave and go to the left. He was walking out of my line of sight. I hoped and assumed that he was leaving. I went to another window, though, and looked out in the direction he went to make sure. I didn't see anything, though. This probably meant he was gone now. For the next several minutes, I went around the house and looked out just about every side of it, but I could not find the guy anywhere. This made me feel a bit better. I figured he must have given up and gone home. I went back to my bedroom. I should have gone to sleep right then, but I wasn't that tired anymore, as you might imagine. It wasn't all that late either. I was done studying though. I locked myself up in my room and turned on my TV. About an hour later, I felt my phone vibrate next to me. I picked it up and saw yet another message from that same guy. At first, I didn't want to open it, but ultimately I decided to do it. It was another picture. After opening it, I saw it was a close-up of my bedroom window. I looked over to the window, but I couldn't see out of it at all because of the thick blinds I had. I then heard someone begin knocking on the window from outside. At this point, I took my phone and dialed 911. I couldn't take this anymore. I ran out of my bedroom and into the bathroom down the hallway. I locked the door and waited for the police to arrive. In the meantime, I blocked his account on Snapchat. I did not want to receive any more messages from him. When I was inside the bathroom, I didn't hear anything else after blocking the guy. He wouldn't be able to contact me anyway, and I didn't hear any noises from the window or anything. I was totally isolated. I had no idea what was going on out there. I just hoped he wouldn't try to break into the house or anything. Eventually, the cops got there. It was only then that I finally left the bathroom. They told me they'd found the man hiding in the backyard. He was a guy I didn't recognize at all. I'm not sure how he knew me or how he even got my Snapchat in the first place. I guess I'd accidentally left my location on through Snap Maps though, which is how he found out where I lived. Since this incident, I only accept friends if I actually know them and who they are. This happened when I was a senior in high school. Snapchat was how I communicated with all of my friends during that time. In fact, I would bet that Snapchat was the most popular app in the entire school. I went to a pretty large high school, and I really enjoyed it honestly. Sometime in the fall semester though, I was added on Snapchat by a new user. It happened on a day shortly after I'd arrived at school. It didn't seem like a bot or anything like that, but I still had no idea who this person was. The username was simply Josh something, and a lot of numbers after. The name of their account was obviously just Josh. There were probably more than a few people named Josh at my school, so I added the account back without giving it much thought. Not long after doing so, this Josh sent me a Snapchat. It was an actual chat, not a picture. He said, "Hi, what's up?" I responded by asking who this was and how he knew me. He claimed that he also went to my school and mentioned the school by name. I believed him and had no reason not to. I don't remember exactly what I said after that, probably just cool or something. We talked very briefly, but I didn't even know what he looked like, so I didn't know if I had a class with him or anything. The conversation didn't last very long, and I stopped talking with him within a few hours. Later on in that same school day, I got another Snapchat from him once again. Once again, it was also just a chat. I still didn't know what this guy looked like, but he said he wanted to meet me behind the school near the English hallway doors after school. Well, that was kind of weird. Why was he asking me to meet him after school? I did know where that exit from the English hallway was. It was rarely used and in the very back corner, in a quieter area with less traffic. I asked him why. He said to please just show up. I really wanted to know exactly who this guy was. I clicked on his username again, but there was no way of knowing. He didn't have a last name listed, or any initials either. Just Josh and a bunch of numbers. When the school day ended, I did not go behind the school like he asked. I just left through the main side exit and went to my car in the student parking lot. At that point, I got another snap from him. I saw it when I got into my car. He asked me where I was. I left it unopened and then started to drive home. The drive home was normal. When I got to my street where I lived with my parents though, a car followed me onto it. We lived on a quieter street, and I did not recognize this car at all. I pulled into my driveway confused, and the car kept on going down the street. I went inside and unpacked all my school things, then went into my bedroom. I could see out the window, though, that the same car was now parked on the side of the street, just a little ways up. It had parked kind of in front of our yard. This seemed a little bit strange to me. I couldn't tell who was inside of it, though. It was a red two-door sedan, kind of smaller, and looked fairly old, at least 15 years, I'd say. I covered my window and went to the kitchen to get something to eat. Not long after, when I checked again, the car was gone. I forgot all about it pretty much, and I didn't get any more Snapchats from Josh. I had a pretty normal rest of the day. That night though, when I got into my bedroom to go to bed, I saw the car was there again. It was parked in the exact same spot from before. Same red car as well. I couldn't tell if anybody was inside of it or not. I had a really bad feeling though. I left my bedroom and found my dad and told him about what was going on. This all just seemed so strange. I didn't know who it was, and I wasn't sure what was going on. I didn't know what my dad would do about it. I figured I should let him know though. He left the house, I guess to get a closer look at the car. I watched him from the window. Now, I had no idea if anybody was inside or not. It was too hard to tell from where I was. When my dad got about halfway to the vehicle, suddenly it started and sped off in a hurry. It went down the street, shooting past my dad who was standing in our front yard. When the car was gone, my dad came back inside. He said he'd seen some man driving. We were glad the car had left. I didn't connect the car immediately to the person on Snapchat, but the next morning I remembered that person. When I looked on Snapchat, I had been blocked by that account. I asked around for some friends at school, and none of them knew who this Josh guy could possibly be. I'm pretty sure it was a grown man who was pretending to be someone from my school. He tried to get me to go with him after school and probably followed me home after I didn't meet up with him like he'd asked me to. It's really creepy to think about if that was in fact the case. Good thing though is I've never heard from him again or seen the car after. This incident happened back in 2014. I had been committed to a psych ward for my own safety. A little background, I'm a woman, and I was 19 at the time this happened. I was coming off 3 years of bipolar medication while at the peak of substance abuse, facilitated by my first year in college. I was going crazy with new adult freedom. One night I had a big mental breakdown, and I was committed for the first time in the adult ward. Previously, I had only been admitted in the minors ward during my adolescence for similar episodes. Within this unit, you had to share a room with the same sex, but weren't given any proper introductions. The facility as a whole wasn't really managed effectively, nor did any of the nurses or doctors seem to care, other than to prescribe and get you out as soon as possible. I was led to the room I would be staying in. The nurse just said to the other lady in the room, "This is your new roommate," then left. The woman appeared to be in her late 40s or early 50s, Hispanic and a little bit taller than I was. She would not keep her gaze off the floor in front of her and didn't say a word or move when I tried to greet her. I noticed she had a tattoo of a cartoon version of the classic Red Devil, but as a baby of some sort. I figured I would just try and leave her to her own business and stick to my area of the room. The first night went as they normally do in a psych ward. a nightly group where my roommate declined to share anything yet again, only staring at the floor and barely moving an inch, while everyone else was lining up to be given their medication before bed. One of the people across the way started banging on their door and screaming. One guy was smiling while banging his bald head against a glass window. Some other guys behind him were screaming and jumping around. The orderlies came and took them away, their screams still lingering through the halls. Having been in psych wards before, I was not surprised by out-of-the-ordinary behavior, like yelling or fights starting, but this was something completely different to me. I was with disturbed adults now, people who had years of illnesses deteriorating their mind, not just angry little kids anymore. I actually felt scared for the first time because of the high level of unpredictability with these people. I knew I wasn't all there in the head either, but these people had me anxious and made it difficult to try and get any rest that night. You know the feeling of being awake but you haven't opened your eyes yet? The moment when you're barely waking up and everything is still in this fuzzy state of conscious. I was in that state later that night. I felt like I was waking up, as if something was forcing me awake, yet I was still so tired. I wasn't opening my eyes yet. The more I came to, though, I began to feel a pressure on my forehead, and I could sense a ton of sweat dripping on my face. I opened my eyes, only to find my roommate standing over my bed, staring me in the eye. She had one hand on my forehead, and the other in a balled-up fist against her chest. She spoke in what I assumed to be tongues. I looked into her eyes, and they were blank and vacant, empty of any emotion at all. She started whispering gibberish faster and getting louder. I was paralyzed at this moment, not sure what to do or what this woman would do if I were to do anything. There was only us in this room, and the nurse's station was all the way at the end of the hall. She started wiping the sweat off my forehead with her hand, while still speaking fast and erratically. I wasn't sure what she planned on doing next. She then put her hands around my throat. At this point, she started screaming while shaking me. That was not long before our nurse rushed in and took her off me. The nurse seemed more irritated she had to get up at all and do her job, rather than being concerned about how I was doing or feeling. She escorted the woman out and said not to worry and just go back to sleep. I don't know how I managed to fall back asleep that night. I assumed the woman got transferred to a more severe ward because I didn't see her again the next day. I was luckily able to leave later that same day. This incident has since been a reminder for me to never go back and to manage my mental well-being better, because while I do have some issues, I could be in a far worse state of mind. I still wake up some nights with lingering anxiety and have to calm myself down to go back to sleep. I never want to go back to a ward in my entire life to experience this again, or perhaps something far worse. I think my love for collecting cards stems back from my early childhood, when my dad and I used to open packs together. I remember specifically going around and grabbing Pokemon cards and Beanie Babies when I was a kid. Usually, if I did good on a test or got a good report card, I could get a pack of cards or something that my dad and I would look at together. Now fast forward about 20 years. I still collect the cards and enjoy opening them with my friends and family. I learned pretty early on in collecting that I couldn't keep everything, so I sold off most of my collection and only really keep items of value that I have the space for or that have some sentimental value to me. The pandemic surge really made me wish I held on to some of those items longer though. Anyway, I don't really collect anything specifically, just items that catch my eye, ranging from horror cards like Jaws and Fright Flicks to Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Even some occasional football or basketball cards as well. For years, I belonged to forums, which then morphed into Facebook and Reddit pages. On these sites, you meet tons of people who like to share their collections, trade, and even sell cards to each other. I made a few acquaintances and even a couple of friends over the years through these different forms of media, but one experience I had always sticks out more than the others. That was the time I met Roger. Roger was someone I met online who also had an interest in error cards. You know, something is off-center or perhaps misprinted during the manufacturing process. We talked casually for what I would guesstimate was 6 to 8 months, until he sent me a message about a card convention. The message stuck out to me because I remember him saying, "Hey, I saw this collectible card convention and card show that wasn't far from where you are. Are you considering going maybe?" I remember my immediate response was, "How do you know that show is close to me? I don't discuss my city or state online." I don't remember the exact response he gave, but I think he said something along the lines that he'd picked it up from my socials and some of the pictures I'd posted. Either way, I said, "Yeah, I was planning on going to the convention to look around, maybe even thin out my collection a little." He mentioned that he was also attending, and that we should meet up IRL and get a drink or coffee or take a tour of the convention together. I agreed and figured there wouldn't really be any harm in meeting someone I'd chatted with pretty regularly, especially in a public setting like a convention. The day came and I was waiting to meet up with Roger. I got a tap on the shoulder and turned around. Can I help you?" "Hey, it's me, Roger." I responded pretty quickly. "Oh, sorry, I didn't recognize you. You look so different than you do on all your socials." "Oh yeah, I took all those pictures a long time ago." I remember trying to steer the conversation. "Well, it's good to finally meet you." I was thinking to myself though, this is a completely different person to the images on the social media pages. They looked nothing alike, not even remotely close. Before I could even process anything else though, Roger said, "I want to introduce you to my friend Todd." I stuck out my hand, but this Todd guy completely ignored it and didn't say anything to me. Don't worry, he's just shy. He'll warm up eventually." I was already regretting my decision to meet up with someone I didn't really know that well. I said we should go in and take a look around. Everyone agreed and we all headed in. In all honesty, it was an amazing show. There were so many cool collectibles and cards. I didn't end up getting anything for myself that day though. Like I said, at the time I was trying to thin out my collection, rather than increase its size. As we approached different areas and booths, I became more comfortable being around Todd and Roger. Todd was quite rude though, and Roger just seemed to go along with everything he said. I ended up getting very quiet eventually, and even though I had seen a lot of cool things with them, I was trying to plan my escape from these people. Roger had to run to the bathroom eventually, and I was left alone with Todd. "Well, I think I'm gonna head out when Roger gets back. I have some stuff to take care of when I get home." For the very first time that day, Todd turned and looked at me. He spoke in a very firm voice. "No, you're not. We made this trip all the way here, and you're gonna make it worthwhile for us." I asked him what he meant, but just as he was about to respond, Roger came back and interrupted. "All right, guys, what's up next?" I said I had to head home because I had a lot of stuff to do with my family. Roger's smile immediately turned to a frown. "Well, if you want to be rude and take off, that's your choice." I ignored it and got up. I walked off as fast as I could. At that point, the first thing I was thinking was that I was going to block Roger on any app we had together. I got home and told my wife what happened. She seemed disinterested and said something like, "I told you everyone online is creepy." I tried to put the events from that day out of my head, but I was still feeling a bit uneasy and anxious. I decided to go to bed early around 8:30 or so. I was woken up to a loud bang at 1 a.m. I couldn't tell what it was, but it sounded like a table or chair had been tipped over. I told my wife to go back to sleep, and I would go check out what it was. I looked around the house and couldn't really find anything out of place. I went down to the basement though, and what I saw still gives me a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach whenever I think about it. I saw Todd from earlier, grabbing storage totes and carrying them up my storm doors. If you don't know what those are, they're like the Wizard of Oz basement doors that lead to your backyard directly from your basement. I screamed, "What the hell is going on here?" Todd dropped the totes and flew up the stairs. I tried to follow, but by the time I got up, he had run past the fence that had been open and jumped into a black van. It then sped off. I think it took a good 10 to 15 minutes for everything to sink in and for my adrenaline to lower. I went inside and told my wife, and we called the police immediately. I told them everything about Roger and Todd, from my conversations over several months with Roger, all the way up to meeting them that day. The police said they most likely gained information on some items in my collection and scheduled the meetup to try and tell me and find out where those items were located. It made sense, honestly. I don't have any other idea how Roger would have found out where I lived. That's assuming Roger was actually involved, which I told the police that he would have had to have been. Nothing ever really came from the investigation though, and unfortunately I didn't have enough info for the police to do anything about it. They hadn't managed to actually steal very much, and honestly it was of little value what they did take, so I didn't really care. I was just glad my family and I were okay. I still open up cards every now and again with my wife, but if I do buy or sell, I do it through eBay or other selling sites now, and I always make sure to use my P.O. box as an address instead. I haven't been to any convention or card shows since this incident, and if I'm being honest, I don't see myself doing so at any point in the near future. A couple years ago, one of my closest friends relocated cross-country with his long-term girlfriend to take a job he couldn't refuse. Only issue he had was that he didn't want to fly his dogs out with him when they made the move. They'd be staying in a hotel for the first month of their stay. He was also a bit hesitant to fly them out for health concerns for both pets. By the time he'd located a home to rent, he was really missing them though, and made a request of his sister, another close friend, and myself to drive them to him in LA. We're all Chicago folks, so the trip would be quite a long one. With the three of us to foot the nearly 30-hour drive though, surely it would be a piece of cake. We left early and drove long hours. Along the way, it was decided between my friend and I that we'd foot the majority of the drive ourselves, and if we needed to, we would let the friend's sister do some driving as well. We were on a bit of a time crunch due to a snafu with the rental agreement, so we didn't have the luxury to stop very often. Past an 8-hour stay in Denver, the rest of the journey itself was relatively smooth, barring getting pulled over right before entering Utah for driving 2 miles in the left lane of an empty highway. From that point, we made it through Utah, Arizona, and Nevada without any further trouble. That is, until we entered California. We were in need of gas, and I had been driving for the majority of the first day. I tagged my buddy in after being pulled over, and I remained in the shotgun seat as navigator, searching through the GPS for a fuel stop. I found a sign pointing to Yermo Ghost Town, which had a mobile gas station. How wonderful. It was convenient, and it was located almost directly off the interstate. We rolled in on a little more than fumes. When we approached the pumps, normally we would let the dogs out at every rest stop, but having stopped not long before and with both dogs sleeping snugly in the back seat, I decided to pump gas without anyone else leaving the vehicle. My buddy pulled up on the opposite side of a beat-up green sedan, where a short, plump gentleman had just turned in to approach the shop. I noticed a few other hoopties at the pumps, all unoccupied. There were a couple of cars parked up near the station, most likely belonging to the employees. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That is, until I swiped my credit card and the pump rejected my swipe attempt. I chalked it up to a misread, so I swiped again. The pump now read, "Please see the attendant." I was quite annoyed, but we really needed the gas. I tapped on the window and told my buddy what I was doing. I asked if anybody needed anything. After taking their orders for Gatorade and Marlboro Reds, I walked up to the store. I made a mental note of how strange this gas station was. It was eerily quiet, especially for one just off the interstate. And that was no matter really. As I walked through the gas station though, there was more weirdness. The first thing I noticed in the store was that there were boxes of chips just left on the floor, like someone was in the middle of restocking the shelves and then just quit. As I veered to my right, I noticed that there was no one else walking around in this place either. With the 6 cars beside my own out there, I felt like I would see somebody at least. Things got even weirder when I realized there was nobody behind the counter. No customers, no workers. Then it dawned on me. Well, what happened to the gentleman who was just leaving the pump adjacent to mine? Surely they can't all be in the bathroom. I began to have the gnawing sensation in my stomach that something was not right. I've always been a person who felt like I could trust my instincts, and those instincts were screaming at me to get the hell out of here. I wanted to run, but I thought I would look suspicious booking it out of the station that was empty, so I decided to play it cool and natural. Don't let your body language let on how badly you're freaking out in your head. I was probably only inside that station for a couple of minutes. I left, but I stopped just before exiting to listen in for anything. A flushing toilet even would have been a good sound, but there was no noise at all. As I exited the shop and saw my car, I began to feel a dread. It's like that moment in a movie where the hero is about to make it to the end of their trial, but the celebratory fanfare disappears, and in that silence something comes and strikes them down. I was about 25 yards from the car when I noticed a gentleman coming from around the side of the shop opposite of me. This was not the same man I'd seen earlier. He was quite large and had a peculiar look on his face. The best way I can describe it was like a crazy Nick Cage smile. I continued walking towards my car. When I turned back to look at him, he was now walking towards me fast and with purpose. At this point, I hopped my way back to the car with an increased urgency in my step. Of course, my friend had the door locked. There was also the 95-pound golden retriever sitting in my seat. Apparently, my travel companions had not noticed how terrified I was, nor the creepy man directly beelining in our direction. I punched the window and told him to unlock the door right now. He only halfway rolled down the window to tell me the dog was in my seat. They were afraid she would jump out when I opened the door. I reached my hand in and threw the dog towards the back seat as hard as I could. My friends were just now realizing how scared I was. He started the car and drove off quickly. I took one last look back and saw the man had stopped about a pump away from where we were, still with that same eerie look on his face. We found another gas station further down the road, this time with a ton of people inside and out. After thoroughly being creeped out and pumping the gas, we made our way back to the interstate, which meant passing that gas station again. It had been about 30 minutes since we'd pulled out initially. We went silent as we noticed those very same cars were sitting in the same spots before we had left them. After freaking out for a few minutes, I received a phone call from my credit card company about a $100 charge at a mobile station. The lady on the phone was really helpful in fixing the situation for me and was entirely creeped out by the situation as we were in the end. We made it to LA just fine and had a great vacation there. It still bothers me though. What the hell was going on at that little gas station off the highway? What was with that smiling man? To start this off, I was 10 years old at the time this happened. Back then, my parents used to own a whole apartment complex. and the leasing office was attached to our house in the complex. This is where I spent most of my childhood. My grandmother would run the office, and my grandfather would do all the physical labor, along with the other workers. I spent a lot of time in the complex, riding my bike around, walking my Jack Russell, and playing in the creeks behind the trees. You know, the stuff a normal kid would do. Nothing crazy, really. I always felt safe around there, and everyone knew me as the owner's grandchild. Certain parts of these memories get a little foggy as I get older, so I can't remember every incident, but I remember enough to know this man, and that something was not right about him. When my grandmother first leased the apartment to this man, I never even knew about it until I actually met him. The first time I did meet him, I was walking around the complex, doing nothing in particular but minding my own business. He approached me out of nowhere and began to make small talk. Me being friendly, I always spoke back. He mentioned how he just moved in. His apartment was super cool, and he didn't mind if me and my friends ever wanted to come over. I didn't think anything of it at the time, and agreed. Things started to progress the more I'd see him around, and eventually I knew something wasn't right. The next time I met him, I was walking around the entrance of the apartment complex. To add, Mercer County Community College was right behind the apartment complex, so I used to travel over there. You could cut through to the college by the entrance of the apartments. I was only ever there because the overhead bridge that looks down into the creek was there, and I used to enjoy peeking over and watching the fish swim around. Once I was done looking around, I turned only to find him there. He was in the walkthrough of the apartments in the college, peeing into the bushes. He turned towards me, exposed himself, and apologized for me seeing him like this. Of course, as a 10-year-old, your brain doesn't process things as easily. I told him it was okay and walked away. He called out to me and reminded me about his apartment, and that was the end of it. I went back home. Now he started getting really creepy. The last two encounters I very clearly remember were the final straw to it all. I was walking my dog Buddy one day. The man saw me again and approached me. He asked me if he could pet the dog. I was hesitant, but agreed because my dog is fairly friendly, and I'd never taught him to be mean. He crouched down to pet him, and his pants fell all the way down. That's when I realized this was not okay. He sat there petting my dog and groping himself visibly for me to see. I was appalled. I honestly didn't know what to do. Alarms were going off in my head. As he did this, he asked me what I liked to do and if I'd like to come over and play some fun games with him. I told him I'd do so one day and that I needed to leave right now. The final encounter, I had my best friend who was also 10 and my sister who was 3 at the time over at my house with me. We decided to take the dog for a walk again. He was fun to walk with, very hyper, and would drag you if you let him. We were walking in the backyard of some apartments. Lo and behold, the man appears, almost as if he knew we would be there, like he had been watching us the whole time. He began to casually talk, complimenting my dog and asking us if we wanted to see his. My little sister agreed and walked a bit closer. He pulled out his phone. I was almost fooled for a second and thought maybe he did have a dog. He crouched down next to my sister and started showing photos of him in the nude with his dog. I realized he was getting closer and closer to her, too close to my baby sister for comfort. It made me very uncomfortable. He could have snatched her and ran if he really wanted to, and I always think back on that. I was in a state of shock as I realized he was inviting us over again. My best friend realized this was creepy, and we exchanged looks. I knew I needed to get us out of there. I bent down and grabbed my dog. I clipped his leash, knowing he'd dart away at an intense speed, just as I'd planned. With the dog now on the loose, I grabbed my sister and noped the fuck out of there. I left him exactly where he remained. as he stared at us running away. We ran home in tears and told my grandfather everything I'd experienced since the day he moved in. I felt horrible knowing I let it escalate so long, to the point where others around me were also exposed. The cops were called and he was arrested on the spot. We had to tell everything to child investigators, cops, the news. It was a lot, and after he was gone, reality set in, and so did the trauma. I swear that dog saved us and got us out of there. I miss him every day, because if I didn't have him with me in that moment, I wouldn't have known what to do. I just think more so about what would have happened if I fell for going to his apartment, or even worse, if he got his hands on a child that was 10 times as gullible as me. The most fucked up part is that he stayed in jail only for the weekend until his family bonded him out. Hello everyone, my name is Luke. I'm French and I'm 26 years old. I currently live in Australia since May of 2019. I met my girlfriend Mina, who is of Japanese origin, about 1 month after arriving in Australia. We met on a strawberry farm where we both worked. We worked on it for several months until the health crisis impacted the planet. So, job on the farm was over, and we had to find something else. At that moment, the two choices available to us were go back home and separate, very hard for both of us, or stick together and try to get through this ordeal. Spoiler alert, we chose the second option. We decided to leave this seasonal job in the countryside and go to the city together to try and find new jobs. Bingo. Good news for me, an employer wanted to hire me to work for a local Australian football team. We'll call this employer Kathy. Kathy explained to me that I could work for managing the football team, but that currently, because of the health crisis, we'd have to wait until obligatory confinement periods passed and the football season resumed. I explained that I did like the job, but it would be quite hard for Mina and I to remain unemployed during that entire confinement period. We had to pay rent, food, and all that stuff still. Luckily, Kathy had a heart as big as the entirety of Australia. Sensitive to our situation, she explained that she had a solution for both of us. She owned a holiday home several kilometers from Brisbane, which belonged to her father, who was now in a retirement home. We could stay there for free during the period we couldn't work. At the time, I didn't really believe it. I told myself something fishy was clearly going on, but faced with this situation, I had no choice but to accept. It was the only real solution for us. We accepted the proposal together and moved into this house a few days later. We played Animal Crossing, Splatoon, Mortal Kombat, and did many other things together during this confinement period. Everything was going pretty well. We did feel a little bit lonely though. The house was very isolated in the countryside. Apart from that, everything seemed perfectly fine. We had a garden, a kitchen, basically everything for free. We really couldn't complain or be choosers here. I would like to reiterate once again that this house was in the middle of nowhere. We had just a single neighbor, John, who took care of his horses and whom I got along well with, but he rarely stopped by to visit the place. He was basically the only guy around. Other details which will be important. In this house, there's a main entrance door with a large blurred window, so you can distinguish things through it. There's another wooden door behind the house which opens onto a veranda connected to the home. The house is single-story, so there are no floors, and there are no curtains on the windows except in the bedroom. 3 or 4 weeks after moving in, Kathy called me to tell me some good news. I could finally go to work. The first day of work, everything was like clockwork. I loved what I was doing, and it was a very good working atmosphere. The only problem was we were still staying in Kathy's father's house, which was several kilometers away, and I didn't have a car. It took an hour and a few separate train rides to get there, the same coming back as well. Like I said before though, I couldn't really complain. Mina was still looking for work. She hadn't been as lucky as me, so she was mostly stuck at home while I was working. The second day of work at 5 p.m., I was getting ready to end my day when I received a surprise call from Mina. She was whispering, and her voice was trembling. I knew immediately that something was wrong. I'm going to switch to her point of view so you get as much detail as possible. I was quietly playing Animal Crossing on the sofa when I saw a silhouette through the blurred window of the main entrance door. It was not the right shape for it to be Luke or even John, and I understood that very quickly. I stared at this figure, who was now motionless in the front door. That's when I tried to get up and slowly move away. At this point, the individual outside started frantically banging. My heart started racing, and I didn't know what to do. I tried to be as discreet as possible, so the individual would think no one was home or would open the door for them. I finally decided to hide in the bedroom closet because it's the only room where you couldn't see what was happening from the outside. Huddling between the hangers and our clothes, I was praying for the person outside to just go away. At that point, I remembered there was a second door behind the home that was free to access. I couldn't remember if it had been locked or not. Feeling a surge of courage, I decided to rush through the house in order to reach this door. During this race, I saw the individual passing in front of one of the kitchen windows. The conclusion? This man was also going around back to check if the door was open. Panicked but already in the race, I decided to run to the end and close the door before the man tried to open it. When I finally pushed the latch, I heard the individual trying to push open the door. Switching back to my perspective, completely frightened, she went back to hide in the cupboard, and that's when she called me. I had a little bit of trouble understanding what she was trying to say to me on the phone, since her voice was trembling and she was so panicked. I tried to calm her down so I could get more clear information on what was happening. After a minute where I asked her to focus on breathing and listen to me, she managed to calmly describe to me the events occurring. Being next to Kathy, I asked her if anyone was supposed to pay a visit to the house or something. No one was supposed to come or even know that the house was being inhabited. I knew I had to get home as quickly as possible and ensure Mina was not in any danger. I asked her to stay in the cupboard and call the police and call me back directly afterwards. I was going to rush home. She decided to stay on the phone with me. Not the best solution, I admit. She should have called the police, but she was in a total state of stress and panic, and I guess having me on the phone reassured her. I ordered an Uber and told him to go as fast as possible. She explained to me that she no longer heard anything outside, no one knocking at the door or lingering around the house. I advised her to stay in hiding. She decided to take a peek outside the cupboard, though, and confirmed to me a few minutes later that the silhouette was no longer visible behind the door, and no one seemed to be around the house. I arrived at 5:45 p.m. I rushed over to Mina and wrapped her up in a big hug. I explained to her that now that I was here, there was nothing to fear anymore. At 6 p.m., it started to get completely dark. I checked the locks and tried to get this off our minds by playing games and watching anime together. That was a mistake, though. In my relief at finding her safe with no further problems, I omitted the detail of greatest importance. Check around the house, you idiot. Why didn't you check the house first? It was now time to go to bed. At 1 a.m., the neighbor's horses woke me up. I could hear the hooves. Mina, still not really asleep, asked me what the noise was. I told her it was just the neighbor's horses. At 3 a.m., there was a series of sudden frantic knocks on the back door. It was super strong, like they were trying to break it down. I can tell you, I discovered what adrenaline was at that moment. I was sure it was the same guy as earlier, and he had one intention all along, to get into this house. Mina was screaming. I started to shake all over. I had this feeling of being paralyzed while still expending a ton of energy. It's very strange to explain. Eventually, I got out of bed, planning to barricade the back door and call the police. As I left the room, though, I heard a dull metallic noise. He had opened the back door and was on the veranda. There was only one last door with a poor wooden wedge under the small space at the bottom that separated us. At this moment, it was certain he was going to get in. I'm not really the type to fight, and I'm not worth much in a fight anyway, but I had no choice. I grabbed the biggest knife I had and placed myself in an angle in which I had the best chance of taking him by surprise. I was ready to defend myself with a knife if need be, to defend Mina, who was paralyzed in fear on the bed. Honestly, I could already see myself explaining to the courts why I'd stabbed a guy. I was scared, no doubt, but at the same time, hearing Mina's screams filled me with determination. She threw me the phone and told me to call the police. I did so, still in the same position and ready to defend myself. The phone call must have lasted 40 seconds. The policeman on the phone understood straight away that this was a serious situation. He asked me for the address and said they were on the way immediately. At this moment, I found myself a little more relieved while remaining on lookout. This is where the individual began to mumble incomprehensible stuff that didn't really assure me. From the noise he was making, he was either a guy who was heavily drunk, on drugs, or mentally ill. He must have figured I'd called the cops, but he was still reaching for the handle and trying to get inside. At 3:10, the cops finally arrived, 4 officers and 1 dog. As I saw them approaching, I heard noises behind the door. The individual seemed to get scared and give up. I heard the dog barking, the policeman shouting, and the man moaning. Finally, it was finished. The individual was neutralized and taken away in the police car. The officers stayed with us to talk to us and get our version of the events that happened, to find out if we wanted to file charges or not. The officer told us there was a chance this man was a patient at a rehab center nearby. He also told us he wasn't sure of anything at the time, and they would have to verify his identity. Ultimately, we never heard back from the guy or the police, though. After that night, I admit we had a lot of trouble sleeping. I contacted Kathy to explain to her what happened to us. She was shocked and felt somewhat responsible as well. Unfortunately, there are no real answers as to who the guy was, nor what he wanted. I even ended up wondering if maybe this was someone who was actually in distress and went about things very poorly, in need of help. I guess we'll never really know. So yeah, I guess the lesson is Australia is great,